Hello, my name is Kuba Kucharski and this is the Dev Team Project, a podcast exploring methods, approaches and skills needed to build great engineering teams. So are you ready?
I'm as ready as I'll ever be.
So, welcome everyone to another episode of the Dev Team Project podcast. And today our guest is Adam Bermingham, a research lead from Zalando. We've met a few months ago at Tech Dublin Summit conference. I met you at the stand. You were representing Zalando, and I remember pitching you this whole podcast idea. It wasn't like even live yet, and you were super excited about it.
I think what really excited me about that, and great to be here by the way, and to have this conversation, what really excited me was the way you pitched it, where you said people aren't talking about engineering leadership enough.
Yeah.
And it's a minority job often within the workforce, and there's some great stories out there that I'd like to be able to tell. And I thought that really resonated from my own experience of working with engineering managers and sharing experiences. It's like, why isn't there more dialogue on this out there? So I thought it was a great idea.
Yeah, that's the problem we're trying to solve here. That's like our mission, to deliver those insights to people. And so like let's start like a bit with replaying this. So I ask you probably about you and your background. So
yeah, I can give you a whirlwind trip through kind of what I've been doing in my career. Mm-hmm. So I started out, I did an undergraduate in computer science, started as a software engineer, nothing crazy so far. And about 3 years into my career working at a large software company, I ended up on a cross-functional research and engineering team. And I was looking at the researchers on the other side of the table, and I was like, I think I want to be those guys. I think I want to be more like that and less like what I'm doing, developing web tools and so on. So I looked into it and it's like, well, okay, now I kind of get what a PhD is about learning kind of research methods and really getting deep in a field. So I ultimately left my job to do a PhD, largely focusing on search, natural language processing and so on. After that, my heart never left the commercial world. Mm-hmm. I was always still very commercially driven and driven by real world impact. So, and also there's some very good academics out there and it can be really challenging to compete with those. Worked on some early stage commercialization activities within the university during my postdoc with mixed results, as I guess happens in that kind of high risk environment. And then I left to become a data scientist. I worked in a large media company, so for me, having worked in natural language processing, which is analysing a lot of content from various sources, mm-hmm. media, I then said, this would be very interesting. Let's work on a media company that actually generate content and see how the sausage gets made in the factory, as it were. And I worked there for a number of years on personalisation, analytics topics. Mm-hmm. And from that, an opportunity to work in Zalando came to me, which is where I work now. And I originally joined as they were looking for some more senior data scientists within their group, as we were founding a tech hub in Dublin. Mm-hmm. At the time. They'd seeded the initial team, and now they were growing out and wanted to have some data science leadership. I joined as a senior data scientist, mm-hmm. But over the first 6 to 9 months, I transitioned into a leadership role, which was quite interesting. So I've been in a kind of leadership role and progressing through that over the last, say, 3 or 4 years. I think it was quite surprising then coming back to that real software environment that I originally started in. I think I picked up a lot of experiences along the way, both in university, commercialization activities, working as a data scientist, that gave me quite a cross-functional view of things, and a clear kind of passion for product development and so on. And leadership for me was a natural progression.
Mm-hmm. I wonder, like, because you're thriving here in Zalando, and you leveled up from being like an individual contributor to a research lead. Like, what do you think was the key to,
Well, for me, I wouldn't say my story is typical of a journey to getting to where I am now. But you might say there's many journeys that aren't typical, and maybe that's the typical. So, but when I found myself working in a software engineering environment, and more my thoughts were dominated by leadership, mentorship, processes, decision making, engaging with the wider organization and the management. And it was kind of, for me, abundantly clear that I think I can deliver value here. I'm going to try this. And I was lucky that an opportunity came up. My boss at the time was promoted, and that left an position under him. Interviewed for it and went for it. But for me, it was kind of becoming abundantly apparent that general management leadership would be a good fit for my kind of personality and experience.
So let's just give our audience like a bird's eye view over the Zalando engineering organization. Like, what is the structure, how it works?
So Zalando is quite a large company. I think many people who don't live in countries where Zalando operates. So they're in 17 countries in Europe and a market leader in online fashion e-commerce in Europe. But say outside Europe, maybe not so known. Even in Ireland, in the tech hub, Zalando didn't sell there until a number of years ago, and now it's kind of much wider known. Zalando went through a big change several years ago to platformize a lot of the technologies within that. So during that period, we expanded our engineering workforce quite significantly, and we invested a lot in some platform services, so things that were previously independent systems or monoliths and so on, into a more scalable to plan for the future. I work in an area in Zalando called digital experience, which looks after the customer experience. So when a customer comes to the website or to the app or mobile web, everything that they interact with, all of the data that supports that, any algorithms that work there, the design, this all would fall into the broader group in digital experience. I work specifically within a smaller organization in that focuses on making sure we do a really good job of understanding our assortment, understanding our products, understanding as our assortment and the number of brands and partners we work with grows, and the kind of diversity within our assortment grows, that we maintain and improve a really nice experience for our customers.
So digital experience is one big area, and are there more? Like, how many more areas like that?
Yeah, so anyone who is familiar with Zalando will know that we have some other areas such as Zalon, which is another service that we offer. It's like a personal shopping service where you can interact with a stylist and get a personalized sort of box. Within our organization, we have...
sorry, I need to close the window.
Yeah.
I forget about it. That will be funny for our audience. Okay.
Yeah, so we have several other programs as well. I think some topics that are really important in Zalando, things like sustainability, for example, would be a big topic, or making sure we kind of really do a good job of understand sizing and what that means to each individual customer, which is one of the known kind of harder challenges within online fashion e-commerce. But digital experience is quite a large organization, and then under that there's several programs and other sub-organizations. And
geographic-wise, like how many hubs are there? Where are people?
Two of the larger tech hubs that I work with in Helsinki and in Dublin were founded around the same time, around 4 years ago, and these sites have about 100 people in each of them. So the organisation I work in is actually evenly split between Dublin and Berlin, and then there's 2 or 3 different organisations like that in Dublin. I think in founding our tech hubs and our remote sites, it was really interesting to go through that experience and to understand what it means to really create a really successful kind of remote site for the company. Everything from culture, communications, and giving clear ownership and accountability on key projects.
And are there any like horizontal structures, guild-like structures within Zalando engineering team?
Yeah, so maybe taking it down a level, I mean, the area I work in is typically kind of engineering and research cross-functional groups. So in many of these teams, maybe half or fewer on the teams are research engineers, or maybe called data scientists in some other companies. Anyone who's coming from an academic background that understands what that's like is that peer learning in data science is absolutely critical. If you're expected to understand new algorithms, the state of the art, understand how to solve complex problems, it's really important to have that knowledge share and that kind of peer network for everyone working in the company. So we have a really strong data science guild, which runs anything from experimental reviews, reviews of new research, invited speakers, and that guild has been going on since longer than I'm in the company, and we have our own kind of setup in Dublin as well. I honestly sometimes don't know how we would be able to progress as a company. The data scientists didn't have this kind of forum. But we have some other guilds as well, which are quite active. For example, a diversity guild, and some more aligned to even lifestyle hobbies and so on as part of the culture. And it's all voluntary and community driven.
And the smallest part of the organization, like a smallest team, how does it look like?
So many of our teams within the organization, and I think as most of your audience will know, this changes a little bit, both temporarily over time and then also across the organization. I mean, we really try to have medium-sized teams, and our typical team is, speaking on the area that I work in, is a production software team. So made up of people who are committing and writing production code to release to production, rather than say prototyping or working purely on academic pursuits or anything like that. We do have other functions like design and product management and so on. So the teams I have at the moment are approximately, they tend to be about 6 to 9 people, or in and around that size. Could go bigger, could go smaller. More recently, I mean, in my experience, I really see the benefit in not having like very small teams, except for something very, very specific. I mean, more like your tiger team mentality, or like really just tackling a problem really sharply. But more generally, in an engineering culture, what you want to build is, you know, going through the stages of development with a team, with their forming, and storming, and norming, and so on. That really takes time. It really does take time. It's a lot about working with people. It's a lot about helping people work with each other, and like, that's super important. But if you have people join the company and leave the company, and with 3-person team or something, changing. It's very, very challenging. But with a team that's maybe 6, 7, 8, 9, even a little bit bigger, you can really establish a long-standing, like really competent team that trust each other, that know each other, that know their technologies really, really well, know their product direction really, really well. And that's what I found, most successful.
Yeah, I need to ask, like, this first time I've heard the phrase, like, tiger team mentality. Is it like a fast to prototype, like aggressive hacker team, or what do you mean by that?
I haven't... it's not something I have encountered very much, really, but I guess the idea of Tiger Team is to put together like a small team that may exist. Sometimes we might call it a virtual team, or something that might exist for a finite period of time to make progress on something, and you might bring people out of teams for a while to work on this, solve a problem, make a recommendation, make progress on a topic, and then disperse back. I have to say, this isn't something we do a lot. But maybe just to make a comment on that, I mean, I think as an engineering manager, like, it's really important to be aware of the family of methodologies and organizational setups that are out there in the industry, and ones from the past as well. You know, I work with people who consider waterfall development something that happened years ago in the dark ages, in the last century, and sometimes I see that they don't really actually understand what waterfall development was, or what the benefits of it were, for example. But I think as an engineering manager, you need to know these things. You really need to understand whether you're talking about process, you're talking about rituals, whether you're talking about organization and team structure. You never have a perfect setup, and you never have a perfect process, but you need to know where your setup and your process is really strong, and you really need to know where it's weak as well, all of the time. Otherwise, you run the likelihood of making poor decisions.
Yeah, I would like to dive into this more, like, so how the Zalando setup is different than the other companies then?
Really good question. So I don't think we're too dissimilar from many contemporary setups. I think obviously one of the challenges with teams and team setup is having decision-making accountability at the right levels. So having like a very autonomous team that like make a lot of decisions, it's very hard for an engineering team to have all of the context they need to make very strong business decisions. It's just really, really hard. But as well, it's really hard, high up in the senior management to have all of the low-level context, particularly if you're looking at sort of a data product that has a research or an algorithmic component. It is very difficult to say how you do that at some senior level, and there has to be some clear, levels of kind of input and direction at the various levels of management and within the team as well. And everyone needs to feel that they have their role to play in actually driving that solution. I think relating to that is product management, which is really critical. And I think even for engineers as well as for engineering managers, I think it's really important to have a think about product management and what its real value is in the company. Not like textbook stuff, but what is the real value. And the real value of product management is having people within your company that live and breathe the business strategy and the customer empathy, and how we are going to meet those customer needs. It's a full-time job. I mean, it is a lot of work, and a lot of things that are really important, either in de-risking or in making sure that when you invest, this is really optimized for success. There's really a pause for thought in product management. Should we be building this? Is this the right thing to build? Should we continue? Are we positioning this right? Are we positioning this in a way that it maximizes the potential impact? Do we have a way to change our minds? Like these kind of topics, I think, are really, really important. And in engineering environments where you don't have that product management support, it's very stressful for engineers. I think engineers a lot of the time can say, and I've done this in the past, say, oh, I'd love to make the decisions. I really want the power on the ownership. Especially in a high performing environment where everyone's ambitious and everyone, I want to do more, I want more responsibility. But you can ultimately find yourself in a very stressful position very quickly, without information to make decisions, without enough support around you. So I think that's really, really important. So
but engineering is like a huge part of it. Like, so how you involve engineers into being like part of these decisions, and like you say, breathing this empathy for customers.
Yeah, I think it's important for engineering, and especially your engineering teams, to like really be aware and visible of activities that are going on. I mean, I think this is obviously where engineers are most engaged is in solution design. It's essentially figuring out the how of how we meet our goals and our needs, and less so on, say, problem definition or decision making on opportunities, like should we pursue this or not. But ultimately, I think the mentality and the cultural mentality that everyone needs to have is like we're all have a role to play in delivering this product. Like it can't happen without any of us, really. I mean, I think there's a phrase that's often used: if you only had one function to deliver the product, the only one you could do it with is engineering. But that can also be quite dangerous as well, because we all know engineering teams can actually deliver products, but they may not be optimized, or they may not have really nailed kind of what the problem is, forgetting about the solution. And solving the wrong problem is the biggest risk in product management.
So is the product role, like product manager, owner, embedded like within the team in Zalando?
So I've worked in both setups within Zalando. I've worked with product managers that were assigned to, say, a department, and they would work between the teams. I've worked in situations where the product manager is embedded in the team and works directly with that team lead on that team's goals. I also worked in setups where product management in my career that reports separately up to a higher senior product manager.
Is there a difference?
There is a big difference, yeah. And as I mentioned already in this conversation, you have to know the trade-offs, right? You have to know what the benefits of all these setups are. So if you have a product manager that's embedded within an engineering team, there's some great benefits. So they can form a really strong relationship with the technical lead or team lead or engineering manager or however well you're set up. They can also build a really strong relationship with that team as well. They're part of the team, and you get this real kind of cross-functional vibe from the whole thing. I think that's really, really powerful. However, again, they can easily become isolated within the organization, and product management is its own function, and it needs its own support, mentorship, coaching, development from senior product leadership. And having the product manager like totally embedded, that can be a hard thing to achieve. Not impossible, but it becomes harder to achieve. So where you have a matrix structure where product management can report separately, now they're a bit out of the team, they're more aligned with the work maybe rather than the team and the people who own the systems or something like that. But you can create a much stronger product management culture through that kind of tight knitting and having like ever-present senior product management kind of shepherding and coaching and so on within that. So as I said, there's no real bad setups here. There's what the bad thing to do is to be really annoyed about your setup, or because you wish the setup were different, to treat it like this other one you want it to be. You have to be honest and candid about where we are.
So let me make sure that I get this right. Zalando is this distributed product management style where, product is kind of embedded like inside the engineering team, right?
So no, at the moment, increasingly we're actually, I think, a little bit in the other direction. But I mean, these things take time, and so we work a lot on our job families, as we call them, kind of the expectations, trying to provide clarity to people, both from a development perspective, but then also there's a performance aspect to that as well. And in product management, we have a lot of situations now where we've recently had some really nice senior product talent, and bringing product managers around them has been kind of a really nice journey.
So this is where our conversation gets really interesting, and this is something that I really wanted to talk to you, and it's like scaling this engineering team, because it's all super easy when you have like tens of engineers, but Zalando is thousands, right?
Yeah, so there's over 2,000 working in technical functions.
So like sticking to this part of conversation when we're trying to scale the team and align it on like the kind of global goals and the local goals, how do you do it so it it doesn't result with a huge mess?
I think there's two aspects to this that are quite important. As I said, I joined a number of years ago. I saw us grow. We built a small office in Dublin, and then obviously Zalando overall grow. There's two aspects to what you're saying. One is being big, and the other one is becoming big.
Okay.
Which are actually two different sets of challenges, because if you're changing and growing, and I mean, if any of your audience are in successful startups, maybe you're lucky enough to be in that kind of second or third stage growth phase. When you're growing, everything grows. So everything from your meeting rooms to your people and organization support to salaries to
friction,
systems and processes and things that worked for you for the last year now don't work anymore, and that can be really challenging. And I think what you have to do in that situation is just to be really cognizant and aware of what's going on, because you can't fix everything all the time as you're growing. It's just impossible to kind of keep improving things and anticipate that next growth. So there has to be a level of prioritization there. And at a company the size, in being big the way Zalando is, there's this concept of alignment gets talked about a lot, and I actually like this idea of alignment. And I guess what you try to get away from in alignment is having like a very large number of assumptions about and very long dependency chains and very long value chains within your company that you can easily stumble on by accident. So hang on, they can't do something unless they do something. They do, like this kind of thing can lead to slowness, like a real diseconomy of scale. But alignment is much more about ensuring you're vertically aligned and horizontally aligned, and that these two kind of really are speaking from the same page. I think in Zalando we have quite a lot of written-driven culture. So a lot of things get written down in like really kind of clear, good and deliberate language. And we spend a lot of time kind of aligning on those artifacts, and those artifacts then become very powerful in terms of providing that shared context. And I think that's very different to, say, the way things were when I started out my career, like working on functional specifications, for example. And I guess the key insight is that these documents don't have to be lengthy or long, but they have to be direct and clear, and everyone has to kind of agree.
I know one of my favorite statements, like quotes, is that shared documentation does not equal, it's not the same as shared understanding. So exactly. Okay, so you're writing a lot of documentation, but how do you make people read this documentation, be aware of it, be up to date with the documentation?
So good question. So But we treat documentation a little bit differently to what I guess what you're saying there. So depending on what style of documentation you have, maybe it's a product requirements or a press release, or maybe it's a technical solution document, maybe it's a decision narrative or something like that. All very similar, but different documents. Everyone who is working on this needs to agree and align on what's in that document informally through reviews. We do a lot of exercises where we would review things more frequently, even quite early, in order to achieve an economy of effort as we go through kind of a document review process, and try to avoid situations where we have a lot of work on a document, maybe for 2 quarters or a quarter, and then we have a big bang review. Is it good enough? Like this, that's not that's a bit more like doing an exam or something, and we try to get away from that, because the act of reviewing and talking about what's in the document is actually what builds up the risk profile, the shared context, the requirements. It all falls out of that naturally. So by the time you get to it, say, oh, this is a product we're really going to build this, or this really looks like a good solution, it's done. Like then the requirements become very easy to actually put together. The rationale is clear because we've talked about it like several times. We don't have to now establish a shared context. It's kind of done implicitly through the process. I think I talked a little bit about processes and understanding them. You see, when I think about a process, I think, what does this process do for me, right? How is this process working for me? And I think that was a real, I mean, it's a good insight for software engineers as well. Like, where software engineers might start out their career in very early days, and they might say, oh, this process is like the rules of how I can live my life. I have to do this in Jira, and I have to do this. It's like, it's not about that, right? It's about helping you in a very low effort way make good and consistent decisions, and provide visibility, trackability, all of these kinds of things, building shared context, supporting communication. Like these processes are hugely beneficial. But when you move into a management role, or as a software management role, you're now in some cases like designing these processes, or supporting these processes, or recommending these processes. And as I said earlier, there's going to be strengths and weaknesses in it, but I think really helping everyone understand how we're benefiting from these processes is really valuable.
So, like, is Zalando team big or getting bigger? Like, because you've mentioned there's like two phases of.
So we've definitely gone through a growth period over my time in Zalando. I wouldn't characterize this as in a period of rapid growth at the moment. I think really in Zalando, I think we made a bit of noise there last year about kind of our 10-year anniversary. We're 10 years old now, and I think this next kind of 10 years is really about kind of maturing as a company, and which I think we've done quite a lot, and understanding what it means to be that big, which has a lot of implications in organization, in process, in how we approach the market and the consumer needs and so on.
And during this like fast growth phase, like what would you say was like the biggest source of growth pains for Zalando engineering team?
I think it can. One of the things we do as in leading teams or in managing teams is to provide clear direction and clear structure around that. As you grow quite fast, it can be quite hard to provide that, or not for me, for other leaders within the company. It's easy to have a team that can accidentally lose direction, or it can be hard to provide that direction at the right time. And then you can very easily have resources in the wrong place, for example. And I think that was probably the biggest challenge, is making sure that teams had clear goals, clear expectations as they grew, and we spun up new teams and grew new teams.
It's like keeping like kind of like an Zalando engineering culture a thing there, like something that you also have to take care of.
Yeah, I mean,
how do you do that?
Yeah, I think culture is super important in Zalando. I think it's like among the top reasons why people kind of continue to work here and really like working here. I think we have a very kind of honest and open, like transparent culture. We don't go after like people who are very egotistical, for example, or we sponsor kind of really good and clear communication and thinking and those kind of things, and people find that environment really rewarding and enjoyable to work within. But we also have a very strong social element in the workplace as well. A lot of people in the Dublin office, for example, will be friends now for a long time. Very active socially as well. Very friendly and diverse to all kinds of walks of life. We've a wide age range and so on. So and I think that's great. But from how do you actually sponsor and create that? It's not enough to just have one-off team building event. Okay, my team is bonded. Great. That kind of idea is you have to be doing it all of the time. As an engineering manager, you're responsible for the culture within your team. So that means every day you talk to them, whether it's a weekly meeting or a stand-up or your one-on-one interactions, everything you do should reflect the kind of culture that you agree that you want. And that also means talking to your teams about how they feel their culture is and where do they think they would like to be, or where do they think we're doing well in culture, and asking them what they would like to do to improve that. And obviously then there's also implications in the hiring process, right? So as we're looking at people, I mean, we do talk about, culture fit and having people that kind of we think would really gel and fit well in the teams, and I think we do a good job of that.
Is there like a specific way you do that? Like how you check for this kind of traits, like the
so what we don't have is like a form they fill out, like or anything like that. But because we are so passionate about our culture and we talk about our culture so much, it's easy for if I were interviewing you today, it'd be easy for me to have a 40-minute conversation with you about your work and your career. I mean, we talk about some scenarios or so on. It'd be very easy for me to understand whether this is the right culture for you. Like trying to find that win-win. Because that's really what we want. Is like a win-win recruitment process. Because ultimately, if it's not a good experience for the candidate either, if they really wouldn't fit in, or maybe they wouldn't like these working practices, they're probably not going to be happy in the job either.
But how do you know this? Like, do you have like a process in place for this? Like, it cannot be gut only, right? Because this would be a disaster for.
So we talk a lot internally in our company around what we call our founding mindset, or our set of values, like it might be in another company. We talk about them actually quite a lot in people development, in team organizations and communications. We kind of live and breathe this kind of mindset. So for example, you're asking about in interviewing here, this would be something we would directly reflect on. So we might talk about a part of our founding mindset, which is to emphasize transparency or solve problems that matter or whatever, and just looking for kind of evidence in what people say, that they've had this experience in their careers, they're kind of going along these lines anyway, this is kind of where we think they will be focused. But as you say, it's not an exact science. It never is. I think the one thing I would say about culture is that it is probably the slowest thing to change in any environment. And I mean that like more as a more general observation about culture. So even if you look at anything on the table, right? So take a smartwatch for example. I mean, the ideas for smartwatches are around for a very long time. They've been available on the market also for a very long time. It is really long time before people, mainstream people, adapt their culture to use smartwatches if it goes in that direction. But the nature of cultural change is quite slow. I remember looking at this in academia, and you'd say, well, you can have 7 years to take a scientific discovery, and it can often be another couple of years before that can be an engineered product. And after that, it might take a period of cultural adoption to actually, if it's disruptive, to actually adopt that technology, which is a significant chunk of time. And within a company, if you go awry with your culture, you find you either, like, you might inadvertently walk into a situation where you have a toxic culture in some dimension, or some other dysfunctional like team setup. I mean, there are obviously mitigants that you can use to do that, and I would recommend that in that case they should often be quite sharp. But it can be a challenging position to be in. And it's a continual investment to try to get better and reflect on it. Like for me, having good like retrospectives and open and transparent discussions about this are absolutely key. We have in my department we have regular kind of retrospectives. The teams have their own retrospectives, and then we have all together retrospectives where we reflect on our kind of internal culture, where we think we're winning, where we think we're losing, and all of us encourage each other to have a really, really open and transparent conversation about it. And just doing that is helpful.
Yeah, it all makes so much sense, and leaders are like an important part of this culture. So I wanted to get back for a moment to this fast growth, and probably if you're growing fast, you will be also like promoting people within the team fast. Yeah. To being leaders within an engineering team, within their teams. So what kind of support do you have to give to those people to make sure that they will thrive and grow? And
I think one of the things that I learned in my career that maybe I wish I had learned earlier, I've plenty of them, we all do, is that I didn't I knew when I got into management, I knew what I needed to do. Like I knew what the job was, but I didn't really understand what support I needed to do my job. And I got a lot of advice at the time that was like, oh, your relationships with your old teammates is going to be different now. You're their boss and so on. And I found myself able to navigate that fairly comfortably, I think. That wasn't my biggest challenge. My biggest challenge was actually how do I interact with my new support network, which are things like facilities management in the office. My lead, who's my current lead, is a VP, right? So someone quite senior. How do I interact with my peer group, which are now other managers? And as you get higher in management, your other managers are further away in the organization. It's really, really super important that you learn how to use those things effectively. It's not enough to just talk to these people. You could say, well, I'm a manager now. I might have leads reporting to me or teams reporting to me. I have a manager also, a lead, and I need to be able to have a good conversation with them about what I need. And that's not like complaining about things or not asking for more resources or like all of these kind of...
So what is it about? Like, why is, just not conversations? Like, what else is there?
So, for example, when you're having problems, how you discuss that'd be one thing. So you don't want to get into a situation where you're just moaning.
Okay.
Right? Like leads, what leadership want from leads is a kind of an assessment of a situation, an expression of what we know about that situation, but also what we don't know about that situation. What are the kind of known unknowns or what are the risks inherent in that situation? A view of options, maybe to approach the situation, and kind of a recommendation. I mean, that's kind of like typically how I would present a situation. And this could be anything. It could be something to do with resourcing, could be something to do with the project being late or losing direction, or could be to do with prioritization, could be any of those topics. And what you want to do is set yourself up that when you have conversations with other senior leadership, senior stakeholders and so on, that you have means to reach decisions and clear guidance in those conversations consistently. And I think this is a really, really important idea, and it's something you need to practice, and something that takes a long time. I'm sure for some people, maybe they it comes quite naturally. For others, maybe less so. And if you think about in a larger company, so if you are an engineer on a team, and then you get promoted maybe to a delivery lead or team lead or something like that, then suddenly like what's kind of one level up and one level down changes. If you're maybe promoted again, you're kind of maybe looking, okay, I have to actually influence at several levels in the organization now. I need to be able to influence my direct team or below them. I need to influence maybe VPs or more senior people, and I need to understand the mechanisms through which I can do that. I think you will find kindred spirit in your other engineering managers. So even having things like communities of practice or regular one-on-ones or with other engineering managers to deepen your relationships with them, they're really important to you. I'd advise anyone to get to a point where they find several people on their level within a company, if your company is big enough, that you can really trust, that you have a trusting relationship with, that you can have an honest conversation about what's going on, have you experienced this, that kind of level of support. I mean, I also have a mentor within our company, which I find extremely valuable, to have someone totally out of my management chain and not at a peer level, at a more senior level, that I can also ask for reflection. But I mean, it's work for you. These aren't supports that will keep feeding you things. You have to actually dedicate effort and time to that. And I think that's probably a surprising thing that some new engineering managers, they're like, what, you just told me to maintain relationships with like 3 levels in the hierarchy, and I got to build like a peer thing, and then I got to get a mentor. Where's my time to do my work? And it's like, but this is the key to actually making your work more efficient, because your decisions get better, your clarity of communication, your shared context, advice from more experienced and people within your area. And this is what ultimately over time you'll see will improve your ability to do your job and reduce your stress and any anxiety you might have about being able to execute at your new management level.
So what would you say would be like a difference between your conversation with your manager and your mentor? Like, I understand that they serve different purpose, but you know.
Well, I can talk to my mentor about how to manage my manager.
Okay.
No, so that, but I think from my point of view, I think again this is another nice topic with as a leader. There's a difference between being a leader and being a manager. So being in a leadership or management position, you will probably find yourself doing a bit of mentorship and also a bit of coaching. So, what's the difference really?
What's the difference? Yeah.
Right. So with coaching, I don't believe this is always correctly kind of implemented or applied or whatever, but here's my view, kind of abstract or theoretical view. Coaching is very much focused on helping someone do their job. I mean, literally help them do their job. It's like, okay, let's look at this task. Let's get into a room. Let's really talk about it. Here's some things I think we should try. And, you know, have you thought about looking at it this way? Like really actually working on the job, helping people through situations or whatever. Mentorship, on the other hand, is a lot more about sharing experience, going a little bit deeper with the person, understanding kind of like motivations, kind of like deep, more deep-rooted, kind of maybe repeating patterns, like these kinds of things. And oftentimes the mentor will be speaking from experience. So a lot of the ways they would share their guidance or advice would be by sharing some of their experience that they would have had in similar situations. I think that's really, really important. And again, as a new manager, you might find yourself, I got to do coaching, I got to do a bit of mentorship, I have all these directs now, I have to have one-on-ones with them. That can be kind of stressful. So you have to invest in a way that you know that your time spent with your people is really well spent and that they're really benefiting from it. Ask people you have one-on-ones with, when you go to the next one, how do you think our one-on-ones are going? If you could change something about them, what would you do? Have I given you any advice that you thought was worthwhile? Is there anything, questions or you'd like to challenge me on how we run those things? Because it's really important that to build that trusting relationship with your directs, that they feel well supported. They shouldn't feel like talking to their manager is some kind of chore or some kind of reporting overhead. They should really feel that you're there a little bit like a servant leader, able to support them. And they should really leave talking with you with their kind of anxieties resolved, some clarity provided, and an opportunity to kind of even deepen your relationship with them or talk directly about whatever the important topics are of the day.
Yeah, I think there's like some or a lot of misconception out there that, you know, managers only supposed to help you with your everyday task or, you know, your biggest problem with your work. And the huge part is the support that
but if you let's look at it just logically, right? If I have 19 people in my department, I could not help 19 people do their job. I couldn't physically do it. I wouldn't. Even if I worked all day and every night, I have to make sure that there's setups and structures in place with my leads under me and in the teams as well. That there is a kind of distribution of kind of the leadership and support in there, and I think that's the topic of kind of leadership at scale. And then as maybe you're a first line manager, maybe become a second line manager, all of your techniques need to scale up a little bit and to be more efficient. So I used to talk to my teams a lot at stand-ups when I started being a manager. Now I don't go to stand-ups anymore. Right? That's not part of what I do. That's part of what my leads do. But I do talk to them a lot in a broad group setting. And I have to now adjust my communication because my channel of communication with them, other than just talking to them at desks or at specific meetings on topics, is maybe a little bit different now. And then that takes then a new skill to do that at a larger scale. My boss has to do this at an even grander scale.
Yeah.
And he has to motivate a very large number of people that he mightn't talk to all of them within a quarter or 2 quarters. So I think as a manager, if you really want to like invest in this career track and really progress, I think spending time thinking and talking about these topics to people, how do I really communicate at scale? How do I know, I'm encouraging trust and I'm building trust within my organization? How do I know that my communications are getting across, or how do I know that I'm getting enough feedback that if I'm making a mistake or somehow not living up to the expectations of people under me, would I know? Would I even perceive that? And then you have this kind of like aha moment that a lot of this just comes back then to empathy and really being able to put yourself in the person's shoes. So if you have a team of engineers, you might have the very outgoing one, you might have the quieter one, you might have the academic one, or whatever, like different personality types you might have within their team, and you find, okay, but I actually need to empathize with this person in a certain way, really have a certain type of conversation with them and adjust then for this other person. You find yourself doing that a lot, but practicing it gets better, it gets easier. And I mean, I remember at the start of my career, I had some very I had one-on-ones that didn't go well, and I remember just thinking about it for a while. I thought some like coaching and mentorship training actually helped get better at it. But it's again, I think becoming a manager is these things you have to be prepared to learn. Yeah. It's part of the journey.
That's a fun story. I just did like a series of short interviews with like individual contributors with software engineers, and I asked them all the same question. What is the top quality that you look for in your manager? And almost every time the answer was like empathy. Empathy. This is what they're actually looking for. So it's kind of all checks out with what you're talking about.
And I think one of the things I found, certainly, it's at the top of empathy is quite interesting. Because I think to have empathy, it's not enough for me, Kuba, to understand, or I believe I understand what's going on in your head and how you feel today. To be effective as a leader, you also need to believe that I understand that. It's not enough for me to just have an internal state where I understand it. I also need to communicate in a way that you understand that I understand it. And if I don't want to be too convoluted, but in a one-on-one relationship, that's really, really important. I think for me, I sometimes refer to myself as a closet introvert, and I think there's many people in engineering management that would be a little bit like that. I spend a lot of my days in outward communication, very interactive, very communicative, and I think as people who maybe are naturally a bit more introverted, not that I really like labels or anything like that, and then put all this empathy on top of it, it can be really emotionally draining, like it really like emotionally tiring. And if you're used to having been a coder or a data scientist or something like this, where you, no matter what happens, you're still going to get a solid 20, 30 hours a week in front of your monitor, just you and the code, kind of like in the zone flow time, it's harder to come across that. It's harder to keep carving out the time for that as a manager, because you find yourself more and more coordinating, communicating, and so on. So then watching your energy reserves and taking care of your energy reserves is kind of really, really important.
And like, is there like any specific skill or a like tip that we can give to managers out there so they can improve this? I really like this notion of people being aware that they are listened to, that their manager empathizes with them. So is there like anything that you as a manager can work on to make people feel that more? I mean, like hard skills, like I don't know, like mirroring or
like what, sorry?
Mirroring. That's like a certain technique that you're actually like repeating a bit of what the person that is saying something to you, and you're repeating that a bit, so you create this feeling of being listened to. Is there like anything specific that that we can kind of
I would say if you're a manager and you have one-on-ones with your team, I would say a good thing to do would be to go into your next one-on-one and just ask the person for feedback. It's the first thing you say. You'd say, hi, great to start our one-on-one. Tell me how you think our one-on-ones go. Do you have any feedback or ways that I can improve?
Mm-hmm.
Like, even as I say that now, I kind of scrunch up a bit because it's like anticipation of getting like feedback.
I will give you feedback.
Oh my God, are they going to unload on me? Or, but getting good at that feeling, you'll never come out of a situation, or very rarely come out of a situation like that where you felt that wasn't worthwhile. If it goes negatively, you will think, I'm glad I know that now. Like this person had actually been bottling up kind of a real frustration. At least I know it. It was uncomfortable, but I know it. And you will oftentimes get balanced feedback. So you will get people saying, you know what, we had that one-on-one 3 weeks ago and I was really stressed because we were going to miss the sprint deadlines and, you really helped me work with the product manager to figure out how we could prioritize. I just felt like, we really talked through that well. I was really happy with how that went. And then you could add that in. You could say all the time in your mind as a manager, you're like building up patterns of things that work, building up principles that you think you can reapply and reapply. Your own bag of tricks, what you found to work, and I think but you need those feedback loops. And you need to ask the people who work for you to be direct and trusting. To create that trusting environment is super, super important. That would be my number one there to focus on.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I wonder how we're doing on time. Wow, I lost a bit like a track of our conversation because it's so great. So as we're running out of time, we need to probably start wrapping up. I was supposed to ask you this question that if we want to give like one piece of advice to people out there, to managers, leaders, aspiring leaders, what would it be? Like, what advice would you give them?
Good question. What's the one bit of advice to rule them all? Okay,
that's tough. That's really tough.
It's a tough one.
Especially that I narrowed down to one. That makes things super difficult. You would probably be able to.
I'll say something maybe that I haven't covered already, which is get to know yourself really, really well. And I already mentioned maybe some feedback methods and so on. But how comfortably could you write down what your career goal is for this year and what your top 5 motivations are? Right? Because if you sit down with a blank sheet of paper and you can't write that out, then you need maybe to think about some of these things. Because what you will find as a manager if you don't have a sense of self, where your strengths and weaknesses are, what you typically do and how you're typically perceived, then other people will pick up on it. It's very difficult to lead other people unless you have a strong sense of who you are. So pick up a pencil, write down your goal or goals, write down your motivations, what gets you out of bed in the morning. Have a look at kind of what you're doing day to day. Does it match those goals and motivations, and start from there. That's
a great piece of advice and a great way to end our conversation. And I want to thank to whoever is listening to us, and I'm really grateful that you found time to be a guest of DevTeam Project podcast. So thank you very much.
No, thanks, Kubu. I really enjoyed our conversation. It was thanks for asking me.
Thank you.